Thunder rumbled across the Montana sky as Sarah Grayson clutched her infant son closer to her chest, staring at the weathered cabin door that represented her last hope in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty since her husband's death 3 months ago. The journey to Samuel Jennings' remote homestead had nearly broken her. 22 years old, widowed, and now standing in the pouring rain with 6-month-old Oliver bundled against the bitter autumn chill of 1879. She had traveled over 200 miles based on nothing more than a rumor that her late husband's cousin needed help on his ranch, a man she'd never met, but who might be her only salvation. Sarah's trembling fist hovered before the door. Pride had kept her from begging before, but pride wouldn't feed her child. With one deep breath, she knocked. Inside the cabin, Samuel Jennings sat motionless in a wooden chair, staring at the flames dancing in the stone fireplace. At 32, his face was weathered beyond his years, his once vibrant blue eyes now dull and hollow. 3 years had passed since he'd buried Emily and their unborn child. 3 years since anything resembling joy had touched his life. The knock startled him. Samuel rarely had visitors at his isolated ranch 10 miles outside of Pinecrest, Montana. The townspeople had long ago stopped trying to coax him back into society, recognizing the depth of his grief had turned the once gregarious rancher into a recluse. He considered ignoring it. The storm was fierce, but whoever had ventured to his doorstep in such weather could surely find their way back. When the knocking persisted, something perhaps the last remnant of the man he'd once been compelled him to answer. Samuel opened the door to find a young woman, soaked to the bone, clutching a small bundle to her chest. For a moment he simply stared, his expression unchanged. "Mr. Jennings." Her voice quavered with cold and desperation. His silence persisted, his tall frame blocking the doorway, offering no respite from the driving rain. "I'm Sarah Grayson. Thomas Grayson's widow. He was your cousin." Her voice broke. "We need help." As if on cue, the bundle in her arms squirmed and emitted a feeble cry. Samuel's eyes flickered down to the infant, then back to Sarah's face. Without a word, he stepped aside, allowing them entry. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A wooden table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, bookshelves lined with well-worn volumes, and the stone fireplace that provided the only warmth and light in the room. Sarah noticed the absence of any personal touches, no photographs, no decorative items, nothing to suggest the personality of the man who lived there. "Thank you," she whispered, moving toward the fire. Oliver had quieted, but his small face was pale, his breathing labored. "He's been sick." The journey was harder than I expected. Samuel remained by the door, watching as she carefully unwrapped the baby. "Thomas is dead?" he finally asked, his voice rough from disuse. Sarah nodded, focusing on checking her son. "Consumption, 3 months ago, and you came here." It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgement tinged with disbelief. "I had nowhere else to go," Sarah admitted, her pride finally crumbling completely as tears slipped down her cheeks. "The bank took our farm. Thomas always spoke highly of you, said you were the most decent man he knew." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Thomas and I hadn't spoken in 5 years. Sarah looked up, desperation clear in her green eyes. "Please, I don't expect charity. I can cook, clean, mend. I'll earn our keep. Just until spring, until I can find proper work in town." Samuel crossed to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and poured himself a generous measure. He downed it in one swallow, his back to her. "There's a bedroom through that door. Get yourself and the child dry. There's food in the pantry." With that, he grabbed his coat and hat and walked out into the storm, leaving Sarah standing bewildered by the fire. Samuel strode through the rain to the barn, seeking refuge among the only companions he tolerated, his horses. The large structure housed 6 horses, including his prized stallion, Thunder, who nickered softly at his approach. "Got unexpected company," Samuel muttered, running a hand along the horse's powerful neck. "A woman and a baby, Thomas's widow, Thomas Grayson." The name brought a flood of memories. They'd been close once, more like brothers than cousins, until Samuel's stubborn pride had driven a wedge between them. 5 years of silence, and now Thomas was dead. Samuel sank onto a hay bale, his head in his hands. He'd become accustomed to his solitude, had embraced it even. The isolation suited the hollow man he'd become after Emily's death. Now this woman and her child threatened the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself. "Can't turn them away in this weather," he told Thunder, who snorted in apparent agreement. "But come morning, I'll find them somewhere else to go." Back in the cabin, Sarah had changed into dry clothes and wrapped Oliver in a clean blanket she found in the small bedroom. The fever that had worried her seemed to be subsiding as she fed him a thin gruel made from supplies in Samuel's pantry. The bedroom contained few personal items, but a silver-framed photograph on the dresser caught her attention. A beautiful dark-haired woman smiled radiantly at the camera, and beside her stood Samuel, almost unrecognizable with his clean-shaven face and genuine smile that transformed his features entirely. "His wife," Sarah murmured to Oliver. "Thomas mentioned she died, but he never said how." She placed the photograph face down, feeling as though she'd intruded on something deeply private. After settling Oliver in the middle of the bed and surrounding him with pillows to prevent him from rolling, Sarah explored the cabin. Despite its sparse furnishings, it was well built and solid. The pantry was adequately stocked, and a quick inventory showed Samuel was self-sufficient, but not prosperous. When the door finally opened again, Sarah was sitting at the table, mending one of Oliver's blankets by the light of an oil lamp. Samuel stepped inside, dripping water onto the wooden floor. He'd clearly been waiting out the worst of the storm in the barn, giving her time to settle. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, removing his sodden coat. "There's stew," Sarah said quietly. "I hope you don't mind that I used your supplies." Samuel nodded once, then disappeared behind a screen in the corner where a basin and pitcher sat. Sarah heard water splashing as he washed up. When he emerged, his face and hair were damp and he'd changed into a dry flannel shirt. He sat at the table across from her and silently ate the stew she placed before him. Sarah watched surreptitiously, noting how he avoided eye contact, how his movements were efficient but detached, as if he operated entirely within himself. "The baby?" Samuel finally asked between spoonfuls. "Sleeping. His name is Oliver. He's 6 months old." Samuel nodded again. "You can stay until the storm passes, then I'll take you into Pinecrest. The widow Holloway sometimes takes in boarders." Sarah's heart sank, but she'd expected no less. "Thank you, that's very kind." "It's not kindness," Samuel replied flatly, "just decency, even so. There aren't many decent men left in this world." Samuel looked directly at her then, his blue eyes assessing. "You've had a rough time of it." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes. But I'm not looking for pity, Mr. Jennings. Just a chance to get back on my feet." "Samuel," he corrected, returning his attention to his stew, "if you're staying under my roof, even temporarily, might as well use my name." "Samuel," Sarah repeated, offering a tentative smile that he didn't return. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, trapping them in the cabin together. Sarah woke early to find Samuel already gone, the door to the cabin open as he carried in firewood. She quickly dressed and began preparing breakfast, determined to be useful. Oliver was fussy that morning, his small face scrunched in discomfort. Sarah walked him around the cabin, singing softly to soothe him. When Samuel entered with the final armload of wood, he froze at the sound of her voice, a flash of something pain, perhaps crossing his features before his expression settled back into its customary blankness. "He's colicky," Samuel observed, stacking the wood by the fireplace. Sarah nodded, surprised. "Yes, how did you know?" Samuel didn't answer immediately, busying himself with building up the fire. "Had younger siblings," he finally said, his back to her. 5 of them. "Are they nearby?" Sarah asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about this taciturn man. "No, parents took them to California after the war. Haven't seen them in years." His clipped responses made it clear he wasn't interested in elaborating, so Sarah let the subject drop. As the day wore on, they established an uneasy coexistence. Samuel spent most of his time in the barn or checking his property, coming inside only for meals, and when the rain became too heavy. Sarah kept busy caring for Oliver and doing what she could around the cabin. She discovered Samuel's clothes needed mending, so she set to work on his shirts and socks while he was outside. When she noticed his boots were worn, she cleaned and oiled them, working the leather until it was supple again. By nightfall, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified, with lightning flashing across the sky and thunder that rattled the windows. Oliver was finally sleeping peacefully, and Sarah sat by the fire, darning one of Samuel's socks. Samuel entered, shaking rain from his hat. "Creek's rising," he said without preamble. "If it keeps up, the bridge to town might wash out. Could be a week before we can get through." Sarah's fingers stilled on her work. "I'm sorry to impose on you for so long." Samuel shrugged, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Can't control the weather." As he moved to sit in his chair by the fire, he noticed the stack of mended clothing on the table. He picked up one of his shirts, examining the nearly invisible stitches that had repaired a torn sleeve. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice gruff. "I wanted to. To earn my keep, like I said." Samuel looked uncomfortable with her efforts. "Your husband, he was a farmer?" Sarah nodded. "We had a small place in Nebraska, wheat mostly. It was good land, but the drought last year hit us hard. Then Thomas got sick." She trailed off, the memory still raw. "And the baby's father couldn't help?" Samuel asked, his tone neutral. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with sudden anger. "Thomas was Oliver's father. I was already carrying him when Thomas fell ill." Samuel had the grace to look abashed. "I didn't mean to imply." "Yes, you did," Sarah interrupted. "You looked at me and saw a desperate woman with a baby and assumed the worst. Well, Thomas and I were married for 3 years. We wanted children. We were happy." Her voice broke on the last word. Samuel set down his coffee cup and stared into the fire. "I apologize," he said stiffly. Sarah's anger ebbed as quickly as it had flared. "It's all right. I understand how it must look, me showing up on your doorstep out of nowhere." They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the rain beating against the roof. "How did you know Thomas was my cousin?" Samuel finally asked. "He spoke of you often. Said you taught him to ride, to shoot, that you were the reason he wanted to come west in the first place." Sarah's expression softened. "He admired you greatly." Samuel's jaw tightened. "We had a falling out." "Over Emily, my wife." "I gathered as much. Thomas never said what happened, only that he regretted the rift between you." Samuel rose abruptly and moved to the window, staring out into the darkness. "Thomas wanted me to sell this place after Emily died, said I was burying myself alive out here. We argued, said things we shouldn't have, never spoke again." Sarah watched his rigid back, understanding dawning. "He was worried about you." "I didn't need his worry," Samuel replied sharply. "I needed to be left alone." "And now," Sarah asked softly, "do you still need to be alone?" Samuel turned, his expression guarded. "It's simpler this way. Simpler isn't always better." Samuel didn't respond, but something in his eyes shifted, a momentary crack in his armor that closed almost as quickly as it had appeared. "It's late," he said. "You should get some rest." The next morning, Samuel woke to an unfamiliar sound: laughter. For a disorienting moment, he thought he was dreaming of the past, of Emily's bright laugh filling their home. Then reality reasserted itself, and he recognized Sarah's voice, softer but no less joyful, as she played with her son. Samuel had slept on a pallet near the fireplace, insisting Sarah and Oliver take the bedroom. He lay still, listening to their interaction, feeling like an intruder in his own home. "Look at you, my clever boy," Sarah was saying as Oliver made happy gurgling sounds. "Are you going to crawl today?" "I think you might." Samuel closed his eyes, memories flooding back of similar conversations he'd imagined having with his own child, conversations that would never happen. The familiar ache in his chest intensified, and he rose quickly, needing to escape. He was halfway to the door when Sarah emerged from the bedroom with Oliver on her hip. Her smile faltered at the sight of his expression. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "I was just about to make breakfast." Samuel nodded curtly, reaching for his coat. "Need to check the creek," he muttered, and was gone before she could respond. The creek had indeed risen overnight, swollen with rainwater from the hills. The small wooden bridge that connected his property to the main road was still standing but covered with several inches of rushing water. Samuel stood at the edge, calculating how long it would take for the waters to recede enough for safe passage. A week, at least, perhaps longer. Part of him resented the intrusion of Sarah and her child into his carefully ordered existence. For 3 years, he'd lived with his grief like a faithful companion, allowing it to shape his days and fill the silence of his nights. Now that silence was broken by a baby's cries and a woman's soft voice, by the domestic sounds he'd thought never to hear again. Yet another part of him, a part he'd thought long dead, responded to their presence. It was like a limb that had gone numb suddenly experiencing pins and needles as circulation returned. Uncomfortable, even painful, but also a reminder that he was still, despite everything, alive. When Samuel returned to the cabin, Sarah was at the stove frying bacon. Oliver sat propped in a makeshift seat she'd fashioned from a wooden crate padded with blankets. The baby spotted Samuel first and let out a happy squeal, waving his small fists. Samuel froze, uncertain how to respond. Sarah turned, spatula in hand, and smiled tentatively. "He likes you," she said, nodding toward Oliver. "He doesn't usually warm up to strangers so quickly." Samuel approached cautiously, as if the infant might bite. Oliver tracked his movement with bright, curious eyes, then reached out a chubby hand. Without thinking, Samuel extended his index finger, which the baby promptly grabbed with surprising strength. "Strong grip," Samuel observed, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Like his father," Sarah said softly. "Thomas could lift a hay bale in each arm." Samuel gently extricated his finger from Oliver's grasp and moved to the table. "Bridge is underwater." "We won't be going anywhere for a while," Sarah nodded, bringing plates to the table. "I figured as much. I hope it's not too much of an imposition." "It's fine," Samuel replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. They ate in silence, but it was less strained than before. When Samuel finished, he stood and collected his hat. "I need to check the livestock. Storm probably spooked them." Sarah nodded. "Of course. Is there anything I can do while you're out, besides the usual cooking and cleaning, I mean?" Samuel considered for a moment. "Pantry needs organizing." "Been putting it off." "I'll take care of it," Sarah promised, pleased to have a task that would contribute meaningfully to the household. As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Samuel spent most daylight hours outside, tending to the ranch's needs, mending fences damaged by the storm, caring for the horses, and checking the small herd of cattle he kept in the southern pasture. Sarah managed the household, caring for Oliver while keeping the cabin cleaner than it had been in years. Each evening, they would share a meal, their conversations gradually extending beyond mere practicalities. Samuel learned that Sarah had been a schoolteacher before marrying Thomas, that she loved poetry and had once dreamed of seeing the ocean. Sarah discovered that, beneath Samuel's gruff exterior, lay a thoughtful mind. He was well-read and knowledgeable about subjects ranging from horse breeding to astronomy. On the 5th night of their unexpected cohabitation, as rain continued to fall outside, Samuel surprised Sarah by asking about her life with Thomas. "He was happy with you?" Samuel asked as they sat by the fire after dinner, Oliver sleeping peacefully in the bedroom. Sarah smiled softly at the memory of her husband. "Yes, I believe he was. We didn't have much, but we had each other. He was a good man, honest, hardworking. He would have been a wonderful father." Her eyes grew distant. "He held Oliver just once before the fever took him." Samuel stared into the flames. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for the funeral." "You didn't know," Sarah said gently. "I should have known, should have made peace with him years ago." Samuel's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Stubborn pride, that's all it was." "Thomas had his share of pride too," Sarah admitted. "He could have reached out to you just as easily." Samuel nodded slowly. "What will you do? After the waters recede and you can leave?" The question hung in the air between them, fraught with unspoken implications. "Find work, I suppose." "I could teach again, though finding a school that would accept a teacher with a baby might be difficult," Sarah sighed. "I'll manage somehow, I always have." Samuel seemed about to say something, then thought better of it. Instead, he rose and moved to the bookshelf, pulling down a leather-bound volume. "You mentioned you like poetry," he said, handing her the book. Emily favored Wordsworth, said his words made her feel closer to nature. Sarah accepted the book reverently, recognizing the significance of this small offering the first time he had voluntarily shared anything of his wife with her. "Thank you. I'll be careful with it." Samuel nodded once, then excused himself to make a final check of the barn before turning in. Left alone, Sarah opened the book, her fingers tracing the delicate inscription on the flyleaf. "To my beloved Samuel, may these words bring you the peace I find in them. All my love, Emily." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek as she imagined the woman who had written these words, the woman Samuel, had loved so deeply that her loss had nearly destroyed him. "She must have been extraordinary," Sarah whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunshine streaming through the bedroom window. For the first time in nearly a week, the sky was clear, the storm finally broken. She found Samuel at the table studying a map of his property. "Good morning," she said, settling Oliver on her hip. "The rain has stopped." "Yes," Samuel replied, not looking up. "Creek will still be high for a few days, but we'll be able to get to town by the end of the week." Sarah felt a strange twist in her heart at his words. The end of their time together was approaching, and she realized with some surprise that she wasn't entirely pleased by the prospect. "I'll make breakfast," she said, turning to the stove to hide her expression. As she worked, Samuel continued to examine his map, occasionally making notes on a separate piece of paper. When she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him, he finally looked up. "I've been thinking," he said, setting the map aside. "The south pasture. It's good grazing land, but I haven't had the time to manage it properly. Been meaning to build a small cabin there, maybe hire someone to work that section." Sarah waited, sensing there was more to this statement than an update on his ranch plans. "There's a creek running through it, clean water year-round, good soil too if someone wanted to plant a garden." Samuel's eyes met hers briefly before dropping back to his plate. "Could be a good place for a family," Sarah's heart quickened. "Are you offering me a job, Samuel?" "Not exactly." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "More like a partnership. You and the boy would have a home, security. I'd have help with the ranch." "A partnership," Sarah repeated slowly. "What exactly would that entail?" Samuel cleared his throat. "We could marry." "For practical purposes," he added quickly. "You need stability for your son. I need someone to manage things I don't have time for." Sarah sat down heavily in the chair opposite him, stunned by the unexpected proposal. "That's a generous offer, but marriage is more than a practical arrangement, Samuel." "Not always," he countered. "Plenty of marriages out here are based on need rather than—" He trailed off, unable to say the word. "Love," Sarah supplied softly. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I can offer you respect, security, a good home for your son. I can't offer more than that." Sarah studied his face, seeing the conflict there, the desire to help warring with his fear of emotional entanglement. "And if I wanted more someday?" "I buried that part of myself with Emily," Samuel said flatly. "It wouldn't be fair to pretend otherwise." Sarah considered his words carefully. The practical side of her recognized the wisdom of his offer. As a widow with a child, her prospects were limited, and Samuel was offering her far more than she could hope to find elsewhere. Yet her heart rebelled at the thought of a marriage without affection, without the possibility of love growing between them. "I need time to think," she finally said. Samuel nodded. "Of course, it's not a decision to make lightly." The rest of the day passed in awkward awareness, each hyper-conscious of the other's presence. Samuel spent as much time as possible outside, while Sarah busied herself with household tasks, her mind turning over his proposal again and again. That evening, as they sat in silence before the fire, Oliver began to fuss. His cries escalated quickly, his face turning an alarming shade of red. Sarah walked him, patted his back, checked his diaper, but nothing seemed to soothe him. "He's burning up," she said anxiously, touching his forehead. "I think his fever's back." Samuel rose immediately. "Let me see." Sarah hesitated only briefly before handing the screaming infant to Samuel, who took him with surprising gentleness. His large hands cradled Oliver carefully as he assessed the baby's condition. "Fever's high," he confirmed, concern evident in his voice. "Has he been drinking?" "Not much today," Sarah admitted, wringing her hands. "I thought he was just tired." Samuel carried Oliver to the bedroom and laid him on the bed. My mother used to make a tea for fevers, willow bark and herbs. Do you know it? Sarah shook her head. I've heard of it, but never made it myself. I'll show you. We need to cool him down first, though. Working together, they bathed Oliver in lukewarm water, wrapped him in a clean cloth, and began the process of bringing down his fever. Samuel showed Sarah how to prepare the medicinal tea, then helped her administer small amounts to the distressed infant. Through the night, they took turns walking Oliver, applying cool compresses and monitoring his temperature. In those long hours, the awkwardness between them dissolved, replaced by shared purpose and concern for the child. Dawn was breaking when Oliver's fever finally broke. He fell into a peaceful sleep in Sarah's arms, his small face relaxed at last. Sarah, exhausted from the night's vigil, swayed slightly where she stood. Here, Samuel said, guiding her to the bed. You need rest too. Sarah didn't protest as he helped her lie down beside Oliver. Thank you, she murmured, her eyes already closing. I don't know what I would have done without you. Samuel stood watching them for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Get some sleep, he said softly, then quietly left the room. When Sarah woke hours later, the cabin was silent. Oliver still slept beside her, his breathing even, his color normal. She rose carefully, trying not to disturb him, and made her way to the main room. Samuel sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling before him, staring into space. He looked up when she entered. How is he? He asked immediately. Better, still sleeping. Sarah poured herself coffee and sat across from him. You knew exactly what to do last night, Samuel shrugged. Like I said, grew up with younger siblings, fevers were common enough. It was more than that, Sarah persisted. You weren't just knowledgeable, you were gentle, patient. Samuel's expression closed. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't. Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand on his. It was the first time she had deliberately touched him, and she felt him tense at the contact. You cared for him as if he were your own. Samuel withdrew his hand. He's an innocent child, of course I cared for him. Sarah studied him for a long moment, seeing beyond his gruff exterior to the pain he carried. What happened to Emily, Samuel? She asked softly. I know she died, but you've never said how. The silence stretched between them so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. Childbirth. She hemorrhaged. The doctor couldn't stop the bleeding. Samuel's hands clenched into fists on the table. Our daughter was stillborn. I lost them both in a single night. Sarah's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry. Emily wanted children so badly, Samuel continued, his gaze fixed on some distant point. When she told me she was expecting, it was the happiest day of our lives. We had everything planned, names chosen, a cradle built, dreams of watching our child grow. His voice broke. Instead, I built 2 coffins. Sarah moved to his side, kneeling beside his chair. It wasn't your fault, Samuel. I was the one who wanted to live out here, miles from proper medical care. If we'd been in town, if the doctor had reached us sooner. He shook his head. I've had 3 years to think about all the ways I failed her, and punished yourself every day since, Sarah said gently. Is that what Emily would have wanted for you? Samuel finally looked at her, his blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. What does it matter what she would have wanted? She's gone. But you're still here, living half a life surrounded by memories and regrets. Sarah reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. You didn't die with them, Samuel. For a moment, Samuel leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. Then he pulled away, rising from the chair. I need to check the creek. See if the bridge is passable yet. Sarah watched him go, understanding that he needed space to process their conversation. She turned her attention to caring for Oliver, who had awakened hungry and considerably more cheerful. When Samuel returned hours later, his expression was calmer, more resolved. Bridge should be clear by tomorrow, he announced. We can go into town then if the baby's well enough to travel. Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of emotions at the news. Oliver seems fully recovered, hungry as a bear cub. Samuel smiled slightly at that, not a full smile, but a definite softening of his features. Good. That's good. They spent the evening preparing for the journey to town. Samuel helped Sarah pack the few belongings she'd brought, while she cooked enough food for them to take on the ride. The atmosphere between them had shifted, not exactly comfortable, but no longer strained with unspoken thoughts. As they worked, Oliver watched from his makeshift seat, occasionally babbling happily or reaching for objects that caught his attention. At one point he began to fuss, arms outstretched toward Samuel. "I think he wants you," Sarah said, surprised. Samuel hesitated, then picked up the baby, holding him somewhat awkwardly. Oliver immediately grabbed for Samuel's beard, giggling when the man winced. "Strong grip, remember." Samuel said ruefully, gently disentangling the tiny fingers. Sarah watched them, a warmth spreading through her chest at the sight. "You're good with him." Samuel didn't respond directly, but he didn't immediately hand Oliver back either. Instead, he carried the baby to the window, pointing out the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "That's the North Star," he told Oliver in a low voice. "Travelers use it to find their way home when they're lost." Sarah busied herself with cooking, giving them their moment, but her mind was made up. In the morning, she would give Samuel her answer. The next day dawned clear and cool, perfect for traveling. Samuel loaded Sarah's trunk onto the wagon while she secured Oliver in a sling across her chest. The baby was alert and cheerful, showing no signs of his recent illness. As Samuel helped Sarah onto the wagon seat, their hands touched briefly. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary before turning away to untie the horses. The journey to Pinecrest was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The town came into view just before noon, a collection of wooden buildings lining a single main street, with scattered homes and businesses extending outward. It wasn't large, but it was considerably more populated than Samuel's isolated homestead. Samuel guided the wagon to a modest 2-story building with a sign identifying it as Holloway Boarding House. Several women sat on the front porch, their conversation halting as the wagon approached. "Mrs. Holloway takes in boarders," Samuel explained unnecessarily as he brought the wagon to a stop. "Decent woman, fair prices." Sarah nodded, suddenly reluctant to leave the wagon. "Samuel, before we go in, I wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about your proposal." Samuel stiffened slightly but kept his eyes on the horses. "And I'm grateful for the offer, truly. It's more than I had any right to expect." Sarah took a deep breath. "But I can't accept it." Now Samuel did look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Why not?" "It's a practical solution for both of us." "Because I've been married for love once," Sarah explained gently. "And while what you're offering is generous, I can't enter into a marriage knowing that your heart is closed to the possibility of feeling anything for me or for Oliver." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I told you what I can and cannot offer. I was honest." "Yes, you were, and I'm being honest now." Sarah adjusted Oliver in her arms. "We'll stay in town. I'll find work, make our own way." Samuel looked as though he wanted to argue further, but at that moment the boarding house door opened, and an older woman with iron gray hair stepped onto the porch. "Samuel Jennings, as I live and breathe," she called. "Haven't seen you in town for months." Samuel touched his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Mrs. Grayson and her son. They need lodging." The introductions were made, and within minutes, Sarah found herself being ushered into the boarding house, her belongings carried in by Mrs. Holloway's teenage son. Samuel remained by the wagon, his expression unreadable. "Will you be staying for lunch, Mr. Jennings?" Mrs. Holloway asked. Samuel shook his head. "Need to get back. Ranch needs attention after the storm." Sarah stepped forward. "Thank you for everything, Samuel, for taking us in during the storm, for helping with Oliver." She trailed off, aware of the curious eyes watching them. Samuel nodded stiffly. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Grayson, and the boy." With that, he climbed back onto the wagon and drove away without looking back. Sarah watched until the wagon disappeared around a bend in the road, a hollow feeling settling in her chest. "Come along, dear," Mrs. Holloway said kindly. "Let's get you and the little one settled. You look like you could use a good meal and some rest." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, if somewhat cramped. Sarah shared a room with 2 other women, a young widow named Martha and a middle-aged seamstress called Beatrice. Both were friendly enough, though curious about Sarah's connection to the reclusive Samuel Jennings. "Never thought I'd see him bringing anyone to town," Martha commented as they prepared for bed that first night. "Man's been a ghost since his wife passed." "Such a tragedy," Beatrice added, shaking her head. They were so in love, those two. The whole town mourned with him, but he shut everyone out. Sarah murmured noncommittally, not wanting to betray Samuel's confidences. She busied herself with settling Oliver in the small crib Mrs. Holloway had provided. The next morning, Sarah set about finding work. With Mrs. Holloway's recommendation, she secured a position at the general store, helping the owner's wife with inventory and serving customers. The pay was modest, but combined with her room and board at the boarding house, it would allow her to save a little each month. Oliver spent his days with Mrs. Holloway, who had a soft spot for babies and was happy to watch him while Sarah worked. The arrangement was satisfactory, if not ideal, and Sarah told herself that in time they would build a good life here. Yet in quiet moments, her thoughts invariably turned to Samuel and his lonely ranch. She wondered if he'd return to his solitary existence, if he regretted making his offer, if he thought of them at all. 2 weeks after arriving in Pinecrest, Sarah was arranging a display of fabric in the store window when she spotted a familiar wagon approaching down the main street. Her heart quickened as Samuel brought the team to a halt outside the general store. He looked much as he had when she'd left him, perhaps a bit more unkempt, his beard a little longer, his clothes showing signs of hasty care. He entered the store without seeming to notice her in the window. Approaching the counter where Mr. Jenkins, the owner, stood, Sarah remained where she was, straining to hear their conversation. "Need supplies," Samuel was saying, handing over a list. "And information, Mr." Jenkins adjusted his spectacles to read the list. "Standard order plus building materials. Planning some improvements, Samuel." "Cabin," Samuel replied shortly. "South pasture." Sarah's breath caught. He was still planning to build the cabin he'd mentioned to her. "And the information, Mr." Jenkins prompted. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Heard there might be a school starting up. Wanted to know if they've found a teacher yet." Mr. Jenkins looked surprised. "Committee's still looking, far as I know. Why, you know someone interested?" Samuel's eyes finally found Sarah, standing frozen by the window display. "Might," he said simply. Mr. Jenkins followed his gaze and smiled. "Ah, Mrs. Grayson. She mentioned she was a teacher back east. You think she'd be interested?" "Don't know. Haven't asked her." Sarah moved away from the window, approaching the counter. "Good afternoon, Samuel," she said quietly. He nodded in acknowledgement. "Mrs. Grayson." Mr. Jenkins looked between them with interest. "I'll just go get these supplies together," he said, taking Samuel's list and disappearing into the storeroom. Left alone, they regarded each other in awkward silence. "How's the boy?" Samuel finally asked. "Growing every day," Sarah replied. "He started trying to crawl. Gets up on his hands and knees and rocks back and forth." A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "Strong boy." "Yes." Sarah hesitated, then asked, "How are things at the ranch?" "Same," Samuel said with a shrug. Then, as if making a decision, he added, "Quiet though. Too quiet, maybe." Sarah's heart skipped. "I heard you asking about the school." Samuel nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Town needs a proper school. Kids are getting their learning in Mrs. Peterson's front room right now. Town council's looking to build something permanent, hire a real teacher." "And you thought of me," Sarah said softly. "You said you were a teacher. Seemed like a better fit than working here." Samuel gestured around the store. "It would be," Sarah admitted. "I miss teaching." Samuel cleared his throat. "Pay would be better too, enough to rent a small house maybe." "For you and the boy." Sarah studied his face, trying to read the emotions he kept so carefully guarded. "Is that why you came to town, to tell me about the teaching position?" Samuel met her gaze directly. "Partly. And the other part?" Samuel glanced toward the storeroom door, ensuring they were still alone. "Been thinking about what you said, about not wanting to marry someone whose heart is closed." He took a deep breath. "Don't know if my heart can open again the way you deserve. But I do know that the cabin's been emptier without you and the boy in it." Sarah's own heart thundered in her chest. "What are you saying, Samuel?" "Saying I'd like you to reconsider, not as a practical arrangement this time." Samuel looked down at his hands, then back at her face. "I can't promise I'll ever be the man I was before Emily died, but I'd like the chance to try to be someone who could make you happy, eventually." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "That's all I was asking for, Samuel, the chance to try." Mr. Jenkins chose that moment to return with Samuel's supplies. Here we are, Mr. Jennings. Shall I put it on your account? Samuel nodded distractedly, his eyes still on Sarah. Mrs. Grayson, would you and your son join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant to discuss the teaching position? He added for Mr. Jenkins' benefit. Sarah smiled, the first truly happy smile since arriving in Pinecrest. We'd be delighted. That evening, over a simple but hearty meal at the town's only restaurant, they talked more openly than they had during their entire time together at the ranch. Samuel spoke of his plans for the south pasture cabin, 2 bedrooms, a sturdy stone fireplace, windows positioned to catch the morning light. Sarah shared her ideas for the school, her excitement building as she described the curriculum she would develop. Oliver, propped on Sarah's lap, watched Samuel with evident fascination, occasionally reaching for the man's beard or shirt buttons. Samuel no longer seemed uncomfortable with the baby's attention, even offering his finger for Oliver to grasp. The school committee meets next Tuesday, Samuel said as they finished their meal. I could speak to them, tell them about your experience. I'd appreciate that, Sarah replied. Though I should probably present myself, they may have concerns about a teacher with a baby. They'd be fools to turn you away for that reason, Samuel said firmly. Besides, if our arrangement works out, the baby wouldn't be an issue. He'd be at the ranch with me while you teach. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You'd watch Oliver? Samuel looked slightly offended. I handled him well enough during his fever, didn't I? Yes, but that was an emergency. Day-to-day care is different. I can learn, Samuel insisted, and the school's only in session during daylight hours. I can arrange my ranch work accordingly. Sarah regarded him with wonder. 2 weeks ago, he had been a man so consumed by grief that he could barely look at her child without pain. Now he was offering to help raise that child. You've given this a lot of thought, Samuel nodded. Haven't thought about much else since you left. His honesty touched her deeply. I'll meet with the committee, she decided. And if they offer me the position, we can try your arrangement. Our arrangement, Samuel corrected gently. A partnership, like I said before, but with the understanding that it might become more in time. Sarah smiled. I'd like that. The town's school committee consisted of 5 members: the mayor, the minister, Dr. Thompson, and 2 prominent citizens. They met in the church meeting room the following Tuesday, with Sarah presenting her qualifications and teaching philosophy while Samuel waited outside with Oliver. When she emerged an hour later, her face was flushed with excitement. They offered me the position. I start in 2 weeks, once they've finished the schoolhouse. Samuel's normally stoic expression broke into a genuine smile, small but unmistakable. Never doubted it, he said, bouncing Oliver lightly in his arms. The baby had fallen asleep during the wait, his head resting trustingly against Samuel's chest. The sight made Sarah's heart swell. He's comfortable with you, she observed. Samuel looked down at the sleeping infant. He's an easy child to care for. Not always, Sarah laughed softly. You haven't seen him at 3 a.m, demanding attention. I look forward to it, Samuel said, with such sincerity that Sarah found herself blinking back tears. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Samuel completed the basic structure of the cabin in the south pasture, a simple but solid building with room to grow. Sarah resigned from the general store and packed her few belongings, explaining to Mrs. Holloway that she would be taking the teaching position and moving to Samuel Jennings' ranch. The older woman's eyebrows shot up at this news. As his housekeeper, she asked dubiously. As his wife, Sarah replied firmly. We're to be married by Reverend Clark tomorrow before I move to the ranch. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. Well, I'll be. Never thought I'd see the day Samuel Jennings opened his heart again. She patted Sarah's hand. You must be a remarkable woman, Mrs. Grayson. No, Sarah said honestly. Just someone who understands loss and hope. Their wedding was a simple affair at the small church with only Mrs. Holloway, the Reverend, and his wife as witnesses. Oliver, dressed in his best clothes, gurgled happily in Mrs. Holloway's arms throughout the brief ceremony. Samuel had made an effort with his appearance, trimming his beard and wearing a clean black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. When Sarah entered in a modest blue dress, the nicest she owned, his eyes widened appreciatively. The Reverend kept the service short, sensing the couple's desire for privacy. When it came time for the ring, Samuel produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I promise to care for you and your son," he said as he slipped it onto Sarah's finger, his voice low but steady. "To provide a home and protection, and to try every day to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." They weren't traditional vows, but they moved Sarah deeply. "I promise to stand beside you," she responded, "to make a home with you, to help shoulder your burdens, and to remind you when you forget that there is still joy to be found in this world." When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Samuel hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a gentle, almost tentative kiss on Sarah's lips. It was their first kiss, chaste and quick, but full of promise. That evening, they returned to the ranch that would now be their home. Samuel carried Oliver inside while Sarah looked around the cabin with new eyes, not as a temporary shelter, but as the place where they would build their life together. "It's not much," Samuel said, misinterpreting her silence, "but we can improve it over time. Add rooms, maybe, whatever you need." Sarah turned to him, smiling. "It's perfect. It just needs a woman's touch: curtains at the windows, rugs on the floor, small things." Samuel nodded, relieved. "Your trunk is in the bedroom. I cleared space in the wardrobe for your things." The mention of the bedroom brought a flush to Sarah's cheeks. They hadn't discussed the physical aspects of their marriage, and she wasn't sure what Samuel expected. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel said quietly, "I'll sleep out here tonight. Give you time to settle in." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. "That's not necessary. It's your bed." "Our bed," Samuel corrected. "But there's no rush, Sarah. We have time." His consideration touched her. "Thank you." Later, after Oliver had been fed and put to bed in the cradle, Samuel had surprisingly produced "it was in the attic." He explained gruffly when she asked. They sat together by the fire, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. "I never thanked you," Samuel said suddenly. Sarah looked at him questioningly. "For what?" "For bringing life back to this place." Samuel gestured around the cabin. "It was just a shelter before, somewhere to eat and sleep, not a home." "It will be a home now," Sarah promised, "for all of us." Samuel reached across the space between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. It was a small gesture, but for a man who had avoided physical contact for so long, it spoke volumes. In the weeks that followed, they established a new routine. Sarah taught at the school in town 5 days a week, riding in on a gentle mare Samuel had trained especially for her. Samuel cared for Oliver during those hours, carrying the baby with him as he performed his less dangerous ranch tasks, or setting him on a blanket in the shade where he could watch Samuel work. To everyone's surprise, especially his own, Samuel took to fatherhood with natural ease. His initial awkwardness around Oliver gave way to genuine affection, and the baby clearly adored him, lighting up whenever Samuel entered the room. Each evening, Sarah would return from teaching to find dinner prepared simple fare, but Samuel insisted on having it ready for her. They would eat together, sharing stories of their day, then spend time with Oliver before putting him to bed. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, beginning with small touches: a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing while passing a dish, a quick embrace before Sarah left for school. Their first real kiss came nearly a month after their wedding, as they stood watching the sunset from the porch of their cabin. "Beautiful," Sarah had murmured, gazing at the brilliant colors painting the western sky. "Yes," Samuel agreed, though his eyes were on her face rather than the sunset. Sarah turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Without a word, he bent and captured her lips with his, a kiss deeper and more lingering than their brief contact at the wedding. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Samuel admitted, his voice husky. "What took you so long?" Sarah asked, smiling up at him. Samuel's expression grew serious. "Wanted to be sure that I could offer you more than just a name and a home, that I could be a real husband to you." "And are you sure now?" Instead of answering with words, Samuel kissed her again, drawing her close against him so she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. That night, for the first time, they truly became husband and wife, discovering each other with tender curiosity. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Samuel confessed his fear that he would never be able to love again after Emily. "It's different," he said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on Sarah's bare shoulder. What I feel for you. It doesn't erase what I felt for her, but it stands beside it. Two separate loves, both real. Sarah pressed closer to him, understanding what those words cost him. You don't have to choose between us, Samuel. Your love for Emily is part of who you are. I would never ask you to forget her. Samuel's arms tightened around her. You're an extraordinary woman, Sarah Jennings. The use of her new name the first time he had called her by it brought tears to her eyes. And you're a good man, Samuel Jennings, better than you believe yourself to be. As autumn gave way to winter, their small family settled into a rhythm of work and togetherness. The cabin in the south pasture was completed just before the first snowfall, a cozy two-bedroom structure that would serve as their home while Samuel expanded the main house to better accommodate their growing family. For Oliver was not to be an only child. By Christmas, Sarah was certain she was carrying Samuel's child, though she waited until the new year to share the news, wanting to be absolutely sure. They were sitting before the fire on a bitter January evening, Oliver asleep in his cradle nearby, when Sarah took Samuel's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. For a moment, Samuel went completely still, his expression unreadable. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, tears filled his eyes. Samuel, she whispered, suddenly afraid. Are you unhappy? He shook his head, bringing her hand to his lips. No, God, no, He struggled to find the words. I never thought I'd have this chance again, after Emily and our daughter. Sarah understood then that his tears were of joy mingled with lingering grief-happiness for their future child, sorrow for the one he had lost. I'm scared, he admitted, pressing his forehead to hers. What if something happens? What if, Sarah soothed, framing his face with her hands. Nothing will happen. Dr. Thompson says I'm in perfect health and we're not isolated here like you were before. If there's any problem, help is close by. Samuel nodded, trying to control his fear. I can't lose you, Sarah. Either of you. You won't, she promised, though she knew it wasn't entirely hers to promise. We're going to have this baby and watch Oliver grow and build a beautiful life together. As winter melted into spring, Samuel's fear gradually gave way to cautious excitement. He built a cradle with his own hands, more elaborate than the simple one Oliver had used, carving intricate designs of horses and mountains along its sides. He insisted Sarah rest more, taking on additional household tasks despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. The town noticed the change in him. The stern, silent widower who had kept to himself for years was now seen smiling occasionally, engaging in conversation at the general store, even attending church with his family on Sundays. People remarked on the transformation, attributing it to Sarah's influence. She brought him back to life, Mrs. Holloway declared to anyone who would listen. A miracle pure and simple. For Sarah, the miracle was in watching Samuel with Oliver, who now toddled enthusiastically around the cabin, calling Pa Pa whenever Samuel entered the room. Though not biologically his, Samuel treated Oliver as his own son in every way, teaching him about the ranch, reading to him in the evenings, soothing him after nightmares. Their happiness was not without challenges. Sarah's pregnancy was difficult at times, with morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. The school board expressed concern about her continuing to teach as her condition became apparent, though they relented when faced with Samuel's firm support and the lack of a suitable replacement. In late August, as the summer heat began to wane, Sarah went into labor. Unlike with Oliver's birth, when she had been alone with only a neighbor woman to help, this time she had both Samuel and the town's doctor in attendance. Samuel remained by her side throughout the ordeal, his face pale with fear but his presence steadfast. When their daughter was born just before dawn, a healthy, strong-lunged infant with a dusting of dark hair, the look of wonder on his face made all the pain worthwhile. She's perfect, he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks as he held his daughter for the first time. She looks like you. I think she has your eyes, Sarah said tiredly, watching her husband and child with a heart so full it seemed it might burst. They named her Emily Grace, a tribute to Samuel's first wife, and a recognition of the grace that had brought them together. When Samuel placed the newborn in Oliver's eager arms, carefully supporting both children, Sarah knew that the fractured pieces of their lives had finally come together to form something beautiful and whole. Epilogue: 10 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the expanded ranch house, illuminating the organized chaos of breakfast time in the Jennings household. Samuel, now sporting silver at his temples but still strong and vital at 42, poured coffee for Sarah while simultaneously helping their youngest daughter, 3-year-old Margaret, spread jam on her bread. "Papa, can I ride Thunder today?" asked 7-year-old Thomas, named for Sarah's first husband, in a gesture that had moved her to tears when Samuel suggested it. "If you finish your chores and your schoolwork," Samuel answered, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "And remember, just in the corral. Thunder's too much horse for the open range yet." Emily, now 10, and looking remarkably like her namesake with her dark hair and serious expression, rolled her eyes at her brother. "You said that last week, Papa. Thomas is a good rider." "Better than you," Thomas shot back, grinning. "Children," Sarah said warningly, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. At 32, she had blossomed into a confident woman, respected in the community as both a teacher and a rancher's wife. "Oliver, are you ready? We need to leave for town soon." Oliver, now nearly 11 and showing signs of the man he would become, nodded. "Yes, Ma, just need to get my books." As the oldest, Oliver held a special place in the family. Though he knew the full story of his birth and Samuel's relationship to his biological father, he considered Samuel his true father in every way that mattered. The bond between them was evident in the way Oliver had adopted Samuel's mannerisms and values, working alongside him on the ranch with a seriousness beyond his years. Sarah taught at the school 3 days a week now, with a full-time teacher handling the other days. Oliver rode in with her, while the younger children attended a small school that had been established closer to their ranch for the families that had settled in the area over the years. As the children scattered to prepare for their day, Samuel pulled Sarah into his arms for a quick embrace. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her hair. Sarah smiled up at him. "You remembered. 10 years, Samuel said, his blue eyes warm with love. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to stay." "Even with all this chaos," Sarah laughed, gesturing around the busy kitchen. Samuel's smile, no longer a rare sight, deepened, creating crinkles around his eyes. "Especially with the chaos. I never thought I'd have this again, Sarah. A family, a home filled with noise and life and love." Sarah stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture that earned exaggerated groans from the children who had returned to the kitchen. "Gross," Thomas declared, though he was grinning. "Romantic," Emily corrected, ever the dreamer. Oliver just smiled, exchanging a look of understanding with Samuel. At his young age, he already recognized the precious gift of the family they had built together, 2 broken families made whole through love and patience, and the courage to begin again. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Samuel and Sarah sat on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Samuel's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Do you ever think about that night?" Samuel asked quietly. "When you showed up at my door in the rain," Sarah nodded. "Sometimes I was so desperate, so afraid you'd turn us away." "I nearly did," Samuel admitted. "If Oliver hadn't cried just then, I might have found the strength to close the door." "I'm glad he had such perfect timing," Sarah said, snuggling closer against the evening chill. "So am I." Samuel turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You saved me, Sarah. I was barely existing before you came, just going through the motions of living." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected gently, "and built something beautiful together." Samuel nodded, his gaze returning to the stars above their home, the home they had created through love and persistence and faith in each other. "Something beautiful," he agreed softly. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and somewhere in the ranch house behind them, a child murmured in sleep. These were the sounds of the life they had built together, a life neither had imagined possible in their darkest moments, but one they now cherished with every breath. Samuel Jennings, the widowed cowboy who hadn't smiled in years, now found reasons to smile every day. And Sarah, who had once knocked on his cabin door with nothing but a baby and hope, had found not just shelter, but a love that would last a lifetime.